Why was she sitting at the far end of the briefing table, as if she didn't exist? The officers spoke in clipped voices, their eyes darting across maps, digital feeds, and casualty projections. Men in pressed uniforms, medals glittering under fluorescent light. Authority filled the room like smoke, yet not a single gaze landed on her. She sat silent, hands folded, eyes lowered, as though she were just another shadow along the wall. But she was. There was something she carried into that room that none of them did, and it wasn't rank. The colonel barked out coordinates. A lieutenant shuffled through folders. Someone cracked a joke that earned half-hearted laughter, all routine, all detached. No one noticed the way she traced her finger along the edge of her notebook, as if grounding herself in the texture of paper. No one noticed the way she flinched, ever so slightly, when the word civilian casualties was mentioned like a footnote. They didn't know her story, not yet. Her name wasn't on the top of the mission roster. She had no title to demand a salute. If she spoke, maybe half of them wouldn't even recognize her voice. She wasn't there to command. She was there to watch, to listen, to do what she had been called for quietly. And still, her silence pressed heavier against the air than their words. Outside, rotors thundered in the hangars. Soldiers loaded gear, rifles clicking, straps tightening. The world spun toward another mission, another operation that would make headlines nobody at home would truly understand. War had become noise, static, but inside her it wasn't noise at all. It was memory, it was loss. It was something that lived under her skin and refused to heal. The colonel's voice cut sharp. "We move at 300, extraction point Sierra, no deviations." Everyone nodded, papers shuffled, the meeting dissolved. She didn't rise immediately. She stayed in her chair, as if waiting for the echo of orders to fade. Only when the room thinned out did she finally stand. Her boots hardly made a sound on the concrete floor. Her silence followed her like a shadow. No one saluted her as she passed, but they watched. For a moment they always did. The air outside bit cold. It was one of those nights when the sky felt too clear, the stars almost cruel in their brightness. Engines hummed in the distance. The base smelled of oil, sweat, steel. Soldiers joked near a Humvee, one of them lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers he hoped no one saw. She walked past them, not invisible, just unacknowledged. Her rifle case tapped lightly against her thigh. She carried it like an extension of herself, though most wouldn't guess what it contained. To them, she was just another operator assigned in the margins, someone who filled a seat but didn't carry weight. They didn't know that in silence she carried more than weight. She carried a ledger, one that had no medals pinned to it. At the barracks, she unlatched the case. Her fingers lingered over the polished barrel, the scope that glinted faintly under dim light. She touched it the way some people touch photographs of family, with reverence, with regret. The rifle wasn't just steel and glass. It was memory incarnate. Every bolt tightened, every scratch along its frame whispered the name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She sat on the edge of her bunk and let her body sink into the thin mattress. A deep breath, the kind that a person takes when they're afraid silence might split them open. She closed her eyes. And there it was again. That image, that sound, that scream she hadn't been able to drown out. The moment everything inside her had cracked, but she hadn't allowed it to show. Not then, not ever. Hours before deployment, she walked into the dimly lit rec room. A few soldiers played cards, the slap of each shuffle masking nerves none admitted. One young private, barely 20, sat alone nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His leg bounced uncontrollably. She paused. He looked up. His eyes flicked away quickly, embarrassed at being caught. "First time out?" she asked softly. He nodded, almost ashamed. "Yeah, can't sit still, feels like my chest's wired wrong." She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "It doesn't go away, you just get better at hiding it." The private swallowed, his throat bobbing. You don't look nervous." If only he knew. She let the silence linger, her eyes fixed on the rippling surface of his untouched coffee. Then quietly she said, "It's not about fear going away. It's about learning to walk with it." The young soldier studied her as though her words carried something weightier than all the briefings. For the first time that night, his legs stopped bouncing. At 300, the night vibrated with the pulse of helicopters. The wind whipped grit across the tarmac. Soldiers moved in coordinated chaos, their gear clattering like armor. Voices rose against the roar of blades. She climbed aboard, slipping into a seat near the back. No one greeted her. No one asked her name. She preferred it that way. Her gloved hands rested on the rifle case across her knees. The straps of her helmet pressed cold against her jaw. Her breath sounded louder inside than outside, measured, restrained, as though she feared it might betray her heartbeat. The bird lifted. The ground fell away. Cities and ruins blurred beneath them, swallowed by darkness. The mission had begun. No one looked at her, but if they had, they might have seen the way her eyes locked on nothing and everything. They might have noticed the way her shoulders carried not just gear, but ghosts. She leaned back, head against the vibrating wall of the Black Hawk. Her eyes shut just for a moment. And she remembered. There had been another night, another helicopter, another mission, but that one had ended differently. Fire, screams, the stench of burning metal. She had walked away, though pieces of her never had. Her brother hadn't walked away at all. That was the truth she carried, the reason she had volunteered for this mission without hesitation, the reason she stayed quiet at the table while others spoke. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was vow. No one else on this flight knew that. No one knew she was here not for medals, not for recognition, but for something far heavier. She was here to keep a promise that had been sealed in ash and blood. The headset crackled, a voice cut through, approaching drop zone 5 minutes. Around her the team adjusted gear, checked rifles, murmured prayers, joked to mask terror. Every man had a ritual. She had none. Only silence. The Black Hawk tilted, blades screaming against the wind. Lights flickered across the desert below, a world that had swallowed armies before and would again. She tightened her grip on the case. Her brother's face flashed in her mind. His last words, his laugh that still haunted the spaces between gunfire. She inhaled slowly, then opened her eyes. The soldier across from her glanced up, meeting her gaze for the first time since they boarded. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something in her eyes made him look away, unsettled. The bird jolted, the ramp lowered, the mission swallowed them whole. And yet beneath the thunder of rotors, beneath the pounding boots hitting foreign soil, one thought pulsed inside her louder than any order. They think I am silent. They think I am unseen. But they don't know what silence holds. Not yet. What made her step forward when everyone else hesitated? The drop zone was chaos in disguise. Darkness stretched across the desert, broken only by the dull glow of villages scattered far in the distance. The air was sharp, full of sand that clung to the skin. The wind carried whispers, dogs barking, a faint radio hum from some outpost, the muffled clatter of armored boots against the earth. The squad fanned out quickly, each operator moving with trained precision. Hand signals, low stances, rifles angled toward unseen threats. For them this was another mission. For her it was a reckoning. She moved quietly, her boots barely leaving a trace. Not because she had been ordered to, not because the colonel expected her to, but because silence was her language, and the battlefield was the only place anyone ever seemed to understand it. They made their way toward the target village, stone houses crumbling under years of conflict, alleys twisting like veins through a body that had seen too much blood. Somewhere inside those walls was a man they needed to find, a man whose network had already left more graves than anyone could count. The mission brief had been clear: capture if possible, eliminate if not. But what they hadn't said, what she knew in her bones, was that this was the same network her brother had been chasing the night he died. And the silence inside her deepened. They reached the outskirts. A hand went up, signaling halt. The point man crouched, scanning with thermal optics. Quiet radio chatter passed between helmets. Doors and windows glared back like empty eyes. She stayed toward the rear, scanning rooftops, her case cradled tight. Her role was always the same: remain unseen until the moment required otherwise. And yet, standing in the shadow of a broken wall, her thoughts drifted back. Her brother had been taller than her, louder than her, the kind of soldier who drew attention in any room. He had once told her that silence was dangerous, that in war you had to make yourself heard or you'd disappear. He was wrong. He had disappeared anyway. Now she carried silence like armor. She let it wrap around her, let it shield her from the chaos unfolding one street away. Gunfire cracked somewhere in the distance, brief, controlled bursts. A dog barked and was silenced. Children cried out and were hushed. She exhaled, steadying herself. The squad pressed forward, deeper into the maze. At the first breach point, the sergeant motioned. Explosive tape wrapped across the door, a silent countdown with gloved fingers. 3, 2, 1. The door blew inward. Shouts followed. Boots stormed inside. Commands barked in languages that never translated. She didn't move, not yet. She took a knee outside, rifle now assembled, scope glimmering faintly in starlight. Her eyes tracked windows, corners, the unseen angles where danger always lingered. Inside, she could hear the muffled chaos, the slam of bodies against walls, the scuffle of resistance, the quick, panicked breaths of men caught off guard. And then silence again, the kind she trusted. A voice crackled over comms. Room clear, no HVT. Not here, then. The hunt continued. They advanced again, weaving through alleys. One by one, doors opened under force. Families huddled inside, eyes wide, children trembling. Women clutching at fathers, brothers, sons. Fear painted across every face. She saw it all through her scope. Not detached, not immune. She registered every detail, the trembling hands, the eyes too young to have seen war. And she thought, this is what silence protects. This is why I can't break. Her heartbeat slowed. The squad leader's voice rasped in her ear. Building ahead, that's the one. The target house loomed larger than the rest. Stone walls reinforced, a metal door bolted shut. Light flickered through cracks in boarded windows. Someone was inside. The squad fanned out, setting perimeter. She positioned herself across the street, prone against rubble, scope aligned. From her angle, she could cover the top windows. No one would escape without her knowing. The sergeant gave the signal. Charges were placed. The countdown began again. 3, 2, 1. The explosion ripped the door apart. Dust clouded the air. Shouts erupted inside. Gunfire flared. Her finger hovered near the trigger, breath steady, eyes unblinking. Shadows moved across the upper window. One figure darted into view, weapon raised. Her shot cracked before anyone else fired. The glass shattered. The figure dropped. Silence again. She didn't move, didn't celebrate, didn't even flinch. The mission surged forward. Minutes dragged into hours. Room by room, the building was cleared. One man, hooded, dragged out screaming, others subdued. A laptop seized, hard drives stuffed into evidence bags. The squad's voices filled the comms, relieved, triumphant. They had their target. But she didn't move from her post, not yet. Her scope lingered, sweeping rooftops, scanning the edges. She learned long ago that victory made men careless, that silence after a mission wasn't peace. It was the coil of a snake waiting to strike. And she was right. From the corner of her vision, a figure appeared on the adjacent roof, weapon raised, hidden until the last possible moment. Her breath slowed, her pulse didn't. One shot clean. The figure crumpled soundlessly, sliding down into the shadows below. None of the others even noticed. She exhaled. Silence reclaimed the night. The squad regrouped, their voices low but charged with adrenaline. One of them, the same young private she'd spoken to earlier, stumbled slightly as he pulled security. She noticed the tremor in his hands, the way he clenched his rifle as though it might slip. She walked past him. Just for a moment their eyes met. He looked at her differently now, not as the quiet shadow who sat apart, but as something steadier, someone whose silence wasn't emptiness but control. He nodded faintly. She said nothing. The extraction was called. Engines roared in the distance as helicopters returned. The squad began moving back toward the landing zone, prisoners in tow, evidence secured. But her pace slowed. She lagged behind, eyes on the village. She felt it pressing against her chest, the weight of doors blown open, families torn from their sleep, children staring wide-eyed into rifle barrels. Her silence cracked just for a second. A whisper escaped her lips, meant for no one but the night. "I'm sorry." She doubted anyone heard. By the time they reached the extraction point, the sun had begun to bleed across the horizon. The desert was painted in strokes of orange and gold, as if the world itself wanted to forget the night. The Black Hawk descended, dust whipped into the air. The squad loaded quickly, the prisoners shoved aboard with hands bound. She climbed in last, took her seat, closed her eyes, and felt the silence again. Not peace, not emptiness, but a silence filled with memory, with the echo of her brother's voice, with the unspoken truth that this mission hadn't brought her closer to healing, only deeper into the place where loss and duty lived side by side. The helicopter lifted. The village shrank behind them. The private across from her stared, his lips parted as though he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. She gave him the gift of silence, the only language she knew how to offer. For some, silence was absence. For her, silence was a vow. And no rank, no medal, no recognition could ever outweigh it. What do you tell a room full of men celebrating victory, when all you feel is the weight of ghosts? The hangar buzzed with noise when they returned. Engines cooling, radios spitting bursts of static, soldiers clapping each other on the back, their laughter jagged and too loud like men laughing at a funeral to forget where they are. The prisoners were dragged away, hoods pulled tight, boots scraping against concrete. Evidence cases were stacked on metal tables, tagged and logged. They said the mission was clean. They said it was textbook. They said it was a success. But she stayed at the edge of the crowd, helmet under her arm, her rifle case locked shut again like a coffin. Her silence wasn't celebration. It was survival. Someone handed out energy bars. Someone else cracked open a thermos of bad coffee, passing it around like a prize. The young private was surrounded by voices congratulating him on his first mission. He nodded along, smiled weakly, tried to blend into the noise. She stood apart, always apart. Because what she had seen wasn't something you toasted over stale coffee. She could still see the children's eyes staring out from behind their mothers, wide, unblinking, silent, the kind of silence that seared into a person's chest and refused to leave. The sergeant noticed her finally. He approached, helmet tucked under his arm, his face smeared with dust. He had the kind of gaze that carried too many deployments, the weight of knowing exactly how many times luck had chosen not to abandon him. "You kept the rooftop clean," he said simply. No smile, no exaggeration, just the truth. She nodded once. "That shot saved lives," he added. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to tell him that silence had saved more lives than bullets ever could, that pulling a trigger was the loudest way to break it, but she only nodded again. The sergeant studied her for another moment, then walked away. Hours later she sat alone in the dim barracks, the squad's noise long gone. The silence was thicker here, almost suffocating. She had her brother's dog tags laid out on the blanket in front of her, the metal catching the flicker of a weak lamp. She traced the engraved letters with her finger. He had been older by 3 years, always protective, always loud, always alive in a way she had never been. Where she had chosen shadows, he had chosen fire. Where she stayed silent, he filled silence with laughter. And yet, he was the one who didn't come back. She remembered the phone call. The static, the pause, the voice that tried to sound official but couldn't hide the crack beneath the words. KIA. 3 letters that hollowed her out. She had sat in silence then too, the kind of silence that swallowed screams, the kind that filled her lungs until she thought she would suffocate. And in that silence she had made a promise. She would not stop until the men who had taken him were gone. Tonight's mission had been a step closer, but it hadn't felt like justice. It had felt like theft, stealing another family from their sons, their fathers, stealing more silence from the world. She clenched the tags in her fist until the edges cut her palm. And still she said nothing. The next morning the squad was summoned for debrief. The conference room was colder than before, the projector casting blue light over tired faces. Officers stood at the front, outlining the mission, listing assets recovered, enemy networks disrupted. Their voices were clinical, detached, as though describing a business transaction. The young private shifted in his seat, eyes down, his fingers restless against the table. He hadn't slept, she could tell. The colonel droned on, his tone flat. Operation successful, target secured. Intelligence confirms links to previous attacks, further exploitation pending. Applause followed, polite, thin, almost obligatory. She remained still. The colonel's eyes swept the room, pausing for just a second on her. He didn't ask her to speak. He never did. She wasn't a voice in these rooms. She was a shadow in the corner. And yet for that brief second, she wondered, did he know? Did he sense what silence carried? Or did he simply see another operator filling a seat? The thought vanished as quickly as it came. After debrief, she stepped outside. The air was sharp with the smell of fuel and dust. Helicopters idled in the distance, their rotors slicing the morning sky. She walked along the perimeter fence until the noise thinned, until the only sound was the crunch of gravel under her boots. That's when she heard it. A voice, low, hesitant. "Ma'am." She turned. It was the private. He stood a few paces back, shifting on his feet, eyes flicking to the ground, then back to her. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wanted to say thank you for last night. I saw what you did, the rooftop, if you hadn't." She raised a hand, silencing him, not harshly, just firmly. He swallowed hard. "I'm just saying, I don't think I would have made it if you weren't there." For the first time, she really looked at him, not as a soldier, not as another face in uniform, but as a boy pretending to be a man, too young to know what silence could cost. Her gaze softened, just slightly. "You'll make it," she said, her voice quiet but steady. He nodded quickly, almost too quickly, then turned and walked away, shoulders hunched. She watched him go. And for a moment, she wondered if she had just lied. That night she couldn't sleep. The barracks were too loud with snores and restless turning, so she slipped outside, where the desert stretched endless and indifferent. The stars above looked the same as the night her brother died. That thought tightened her chest until she couldn't breathe. She knelt in the sand, the tags cold in her palm. Her whisper bled into the night, carried away by the wind. "Why you, why not me?" There was no answer, there never was, only silence. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She had forgotten how. In the distance, the base lights flickered, generators hummed. Life continued, indifferent to her questions. She pressed the tags to her lips. For a second, she thought she could still taste his laughter on the metal. And then she stood, straightened, locked it all away again. The silence returned, heavy, unyielding, her only shield. Back in the barracks, the private stirred awake as she passed. He blinked up at her groggily, his face pale in the dim light. "You don't sleep much, do you?" he murmured. She paused. "No," she said simply. "Neither do I," he admitted, his voice cracked, quiet as a confession. "I keep seeing it, the one eye." His voice broke, he couldn't finish. She stood over him, her shadow stretching across his bunk. "It never leaves," she said softly. "But neither do you, remember that." His eyes glistened in the dark. He nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Not yet. She turned away, walking back to her bunk. The silence followed her like a cloak. And yet, even in silence, something shifted. The private would never salute her. The officers would never call her name. No medal would pin itself to her chest. But that boy, with eyes too young for war, would remember her words long after she was gone. And in some ways, maybe, that was louder than any victory speech. Why was her name the only one missing from the roster? The orders came down 2 days later. Another mission, another night. But when the list of operators was read aloud in the hangar, her name wasn't there. She sat in the back of the room, helmet on her knee, listening as others leaned forward, their eyes lighting up or narrowing with fatigue. The colonel's voice cut across the space like steel. "This is a high-value priority strike. Your wheel's up at 200. Men nodded. One or two smirked, muttering about payback. The private looked pale again, but he said nothing. And she stayed silent. Because they hadn't called her name. When the meeting broke, she lingered, watching as the squad dispersed. Excitement and dread hung in the air, indistinguishable from each other. The colonel stacked papers into a neat pile, his jaw tight, his movements clipped. She stood slowly, walking forward until the only sound was her boots on concrete. "You left me off." The colonel didn't look up. "Correct." Her voice stayed calm, but inside something cracked. "Why?" "You're not needed." His tone was flat, dismissive. "We have enough firepower." Firepower, that was all he saw. That was all any of them saw. She leaned closer, her voice lowering into something sharp. "Then why was I there last time?" The colonel finally looked at her. His eyes narrowed, not with anger but calculation. "You did your job," he said, "but this one isn't yours." She stared at him, silence pressing against the space between them. Did he know? Did he sense what tethered her to these missions? Did he know her brother's name, his grave, his unfinished fight? Or was she just another body with a rifle, easily replaced, easily ignored? She didn't answer, didn't argue. She simply turned and walked out, silence trailing behind her like smoke. Outside, the night smelled of fuel and grit. Soldiers moved with purpose, prepping gear, laughing too loudly, sharpening nerves into banter. The helicopters loomed like predators waiting to strike. She sat on a crate in the shadows, helmet dangling from her fingers. She watched them load up, watched the private stumble slightly as he adjusted his pack, watched the sergeant bark orders, his gravel voice cutting through the night. She should have felt relief. Being left behind meant safety. It meant rest. It meant she could finally let her silence be still. But instead, it felt like exile. Her brother hadn't been left behind. He hadn't been given the gift of safety. Why should she? Her jaw clenched. Her hand closed around the dog tags in her pocket until the edges dug into her skin. And then, before she could second-guess it, she stood and walked toward the waiting helicopter. The sergeant spotted her first. "You're not on the roster." Her eyes met his, steady, silent. He hesitated. For a second his jaw worked as if he might challenge her, but then his gaze shifted. He remembered the rooftop, the shot no one else had seen coming, the lives she'd saved without saying a word. Finally he grunted, "Fine, find a seat, don't make me regret it." She climbed aboard. No one stopped her. The flight was long, the kind of long where silence became louder than the engines. Everyone sat hunched, weapons resting across their laps, eyes half closed but minds wide awake. She leaned against the vibrating wall, helmet tilted forward, breath steady, her rifle case pressed into her knees. The private sat across from her. His eyes flicked up every few minutes, then darted away quickly. He wanted to ask her something. She could see it in the way his lips pressed together, the way his hand tapped against his thigh. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper against the roar of blades. "Do you ever feel like you're not supposed to be here?" She lifted her head. His eyes were wide, searching, not for tactics, not for orders, for truth. Her voice was quiet but certain, every day. He blinked, his shoulders eased just slightly. And for the first time since she'd known him, he let out a shaky laugh. The mission site loomed below, a stretch of desert broken by jagged hills, caves carved deep into rock, a network of shadows hiding something more dangerous than stone. Intelligence said this was a weapons depot, a hub, a nest. The squad disembarked quickly, boots crunching into sand. The night was cold, stars sharp against the black sky. The sergeant gave hand signals, dividing the team into two groups. She slipped into position without being told, rifle in hand, eyes scanning ridges. The cave's breath silence back at her, heavy and suffocating. They moved forward. The first shots cracked from the hills. Ambush. The squad dove for cover, bullets sparking off rock. Shouts filled the night. Gunfire echoed in sharp bursts. The smell of cordite burned the air. She dropped prone, scope aligned, finger steady. One figure on the ridge, one breath, one shot. Gone. Another shadow moved, muzzle flashing. Another shot, silence again. Around her, chaos reigned. The private scrambled behind a boulder, his breaths ragged, hands shaking. The sergeant roared commands, his voice barely audible over the storm of fire. She stayed calm, silent. Her rifle barked only when needed, each round cutting through the dark like punctuation in a sentence only she understood. But then something shifted. From the corner of her scope, she saw movement deeper in the cave. Not gunmen, not fighters, families, women clutching children, terrified eyes peeking from behind stone. Her chest tightened. The mission brief hadn't mentioned this. "Move in," the sergeant's voice thundered over comms. "Secure the depot." Her finger froze on the trigger, her breath caught. She could end this. One shot, two shots, clear the way for the squad. But she couldn't pull the trigger. Not with those eyes staring back at her from the shadows. Her silence became heavier than her rifle. "Sniper status," the sergeant barked. She didn't answer. "Status." Her breath shook, her scope shifted, away from the women, away from the children, toward the fighters circling them. Her shots cracked, two men dropped. The women didn't move, didn't scream, they just held tighter to their children. The sergeant's voice crackled back, rough but steady. "Good cover, keep it tight." No one knew, no one but her. Minutes stretched like hours. The squad pressed deeper, clearing corridors, explosives rigged, caches seized. When it was over, the air reeked of dust and smoke. The caves burned. The depot was destroyed. The squad regrouped outside, battered but alive. The sergeant's eyes swept the team, counting, measuring, all accounted for. But she stayed near the entrance, her gaze lingering on the dark where those families had vanished. Her silence held them, protected them, and no one would ever know. On the flight back, the squad's voices were louder than before. Jokes flew, adrenaline surged. Another mission survived, another success. But she sat with her rifle across her lap, her hands trembling where no one could see. The private leaned forward, his voice soft. "You saved me again." She looked up. "I was pinned, you cleared him, I saw it." He gave a weak smile. "I don't know how you always know where to be." Her lips parted. For a second, words hovered. She almost told him the truth, that she didn't always know. that sometimes silence guided her in ways she couldn't explain. But instead she closed her mouth and let the silence speak for her. Back on base, the colonel's report praised efficiency, minimal losses, high-value target neutralized. But in her bunk, she sat with her brother's tags pressed to her palm, her body trembling. Because for the first time, she wondered if silence wasn't a shield at all. Maybe it was a prison. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't sure she wanted to carry it anymore. They celebrated without her. The mess hall was loud that night, every table crowded, laughter ringing like gunfire in a valley. Plates clattered, bottles slammed, voices rose in drunken relief. Another mission survived, another notch carved into the long, bloody ledger. But she wasn't there. She sat outside on the edge of the loading dock, boots dangling over empty air, the glow of a single cigarette burning in the dark. She didn't smoke, hadn't in years, but someone had left the pack on a bench and she had needed something, anything, to fill her lungs other than silence. The desert stretched before her, endless and cruel. Wind dragged grit across the tarmac, whispering like ghosts. Her brother's tags lay heavy in her palm. She should have felt triumph, or at least relief. The mission had gone well, the squad was alive, the depot was ash and ruin. But all she saw when she closed her eyes were those children in the cave, the way they clung to their mothers, the way their silence had mirrored hers. What would have happened if she hadn't seen them, if she'd followed orders blindly? She dragged in another lungful of smoke, coughed, and ground the cigarette out beneath her boot. "Not your vice," a voice said behind her. She didn't turn, didn't ask for an audience. The sergeant stepped into view, his broad shoulders blocking the mess hall's light. He leaned against the railing, folding his arms. "You were off tonight." Her jaw tightened. "Define off." "You hesitated twice, maybe 3 times." Her stomach knotted, and yet everyone came back. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. Everyone did, but sometimes hesitation gets people killed. The silence between them thickened. He didn't know, he hadn't seen, but he sensed something. And that was almost worse. Finally, he pushed off the railing. "Don't make me regret trusting you. We don't all get second chances." Then he walked away, leaving her alone with the wind and the ghosts. The next morning, the base was quieter. A low, buzzing quiet that clung to walls and ceilings, waiting for the next set of orders. She lay in her bunk, staring at the metal above her, listening to the private breathe unevenly in the cot across the aisle. He tossed, turned, muttered under his breath. She knew that sound. The sound of replaying firefights in your head until you swore the bullets were still flying. Finally, he sat up, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. He glanced at her, eyes hollow. "You didn't shoot them." Her blood ran cold. He swallowed, voice rough. "In the cave, I saw you. There were people, women, kids. You didn't shoot them." Her mouth went dry. I don't blame you," he rushed on. "I wouldn't have either, but if the sergeant knew." She sat up slowly, every movement deliberate, her silence stretching so taut it felt like it might snap. The private's voice cracked. "I won't say anything, I swear, but I had to tell someone." Her chest rose and fell once, twice. Then she whispered, so soft it was almost lost, "You didn't tell me, you told yourself." He blinked, confusion flickering across his face, but then, slowly, he nodded. And the silence held between them like a fragile pact. That afternoon, orders came. Another op, this time closer, a convoy raid. No grand speeches, no tactical poetry, just coordinates, timing, payload. The squad geared up in the hangar, the familiar ritual of straps, ammo checks, blades tucked into boots. The air stank of oil and sweat. The sergeant's gaze lingered on her longer than usual, not suspicious, not accusing, just watching, weighing. She returned the stare without flinching. When the convoy rolled out, dust plumes curling into the horizon, She rode in silence, her rifle balanced across her knees. The private sat beside her, stealing glances, but he didn't speak. The desert blurred by. The ambush was textbook. They set charges along the canyon road, the sergeant calling the countdown over comms. When the lead truck hit the pressure plate, fire erupted skyward, flipping metal like toys. Shouts followed, weapons crackled, chaos swallowed the canyon. She moved with precision. One shot, one fall, another shot, another silence. The squad advanced, cutting through the convoy like blades. But then, a door flew open on the last truck. Not fighters, civilians again, bound, shackled, human shields crammed into the back like cargo. Her stomach dropped. The private froze, his rifle wavering. His lips moved soundlessly, panic seizing him. The sergeant roared, "Clear the truck." Bullets sparked off metal, screams tore the air. The civilians ducked, sobbing. Her hands shook. This was the cave all over again, but worse. If she didn't act, they would die. If she acted wrong, they would still die. Her silence screamed louder than any gunfire. She inhaled, exhaled. Then she moved. She sprinted forward, breaking cover. The squad shouted after her, but she didn't stop. Her rifle barked, clean shots, precise, every fighter near the truck dropping before they could react. The sergeant cursed over comms. "What the hell are you doing?" She didn't answer. She ripped the truck doors wide, dragging the first civilian out, then the second. Bullets sparked around her. The private stumbled into motion, covering her with shaky bursts of fire. "Get them out," she snapped, words, real words, tearing out of her throat. The private froze, shock flickering across his face. But then he obeyed, pulling panicked prisoners free. One by one, they spilled onto the ground, scrambling toward cover. The sergeant's voice thundered again. "Fall back, that's an order." She ignored him. Her hands kept moving, pulling bodies, shielding them, firing at shapes in the dust. Her silence was gone now, shattered. Because some things couldn't be left unsaid. By the time the last civilian was free, her arms ached, lungs burned, ears rang with chaos. The squad had formed a perimeter, holding the line with grim determination. The sergeant grabbed her arm, yanking her behind cover. His face was a storm, veins standing out on his neck. "You disobeyed." Her chest heaved. They were unarmed. "That's not your call." Her eyes blazed. "Then whose is it?" For a moment, silence stretched between them, jagged and raw. His glare faltered just slightly. Then he shoved her away. "You better hope command sees it your way." The battle ended in smoke and wreckage. The convoy burned, black plumes twisting into the sky. The rescued civilians huddled in the sand, their faces pale, eyes hollow. The squad gathered, bruised and battered, waiting for exfil. No one spoke to her. The private sat nearby, his rifle across his lap, his gaze fixed on the ground. But when she caught his eye, he gave the faintest nod. And in that nod, she felt something shift. Not trust, not yet. But belief. Back on base, the colonel was waiting. His office smelled of paper and polish, the walls lined with maps and medals. He listened as the sergeant gave his report, voice clipped, every word chosen like ammunition. When it was her turn, she stood straight, hands clasped behind her back. Her silence wrapped around her like armor. The colonel's gaze pinned her. "Is it true you broke formation?" She met his eyes. And for the first time, she spoke without hesitation. "Yes." The room went still. "Why?" Her throat tightened, but her voice was steady. Because silence doesn't always mean obedience. The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You're playing a dangerous game, soldier." Her lips pressed into a line. "So is war." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, sharp, crackling with a new kind of defiance. And for the first time, she realized her silence wasn't breaking. It was changing. Why didn't they strip her rank? That was the question that burned through the barracks the next morning. Soldiers whispered when she passed, voices dropping, eyes sharp. Normally, disobedience meant demotion, suspension, at best reassignment, at worst. But nothing came. No orders, no punishment, just silence. And somehow, that silence was heavier than any sentence. She sat on her bunk, boots unlaced, staring at the floor as the private fumbled with his kit across the aisle. He hadn't spoken since they returned. Not about the mission, not about what she'd done. Finally, he cleared his throat. Why didn't they? He trailed off, hands shaking as he tried to snap a magazine into place. She looked up. Didn't what? Why didn't they make an example of you? Her jaw flexed. Maybe they're waiting. For what? She didn't answer, because the truth was she didn't know. Later, the sergeant summoned her to the tarmac. The sun baked the concrete, heat shimmering in the air. Helicopters sat idle, rotors still, their hulking frames like beasts sleeping in the sun. He stood there, arms crossed, his shadow sharp and unyielding. "You think you won," he said flatly. She squinted against the glare. "I didn't. You went against orders, against me. That doesn't just disappear because you happen to be right this time." Her voice was low, steady. "So say the word, end it." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, yes, but beneath it something else, something like uncertainty. Instead, he turned away. "You don't get it. War doesn't care about right. War cares about control. And people like you, people who think silence makes them untouchable, you scare them." She stood frozen, his words lodging deep, until the sound of boots on the tarmac broke the moment. The colonel approached. His presence was quiet, but commanding in a way that pulled all air from the space around him. He handed her a sealed folder, new orders. Her fingers tightened around it. "Read them carefully," the colonel said, his eyes unreadable. "And remember, silence isn't always survival." Inside, the folder contained coordinates, a location in the mountains, not far but deep in contested territory. Recon only, it said, no engagement unless fired upon. But she knew better. Recon never stayed recon. That night she couldn't sleep. The bunk was too small, the walls too close. She kept seeing the faces of the civilians she'd pulled from the convoy, their hollow eyes, their quiet gratitude. But she also saw the squad's faces, the sergeant's clenched jaw, the private's unsteady hands, the unspoken question burning between them all: whose side are you on? She pressed her brother's tags against her chest, the cool metal grounding her. "What would you have done?" she asked him in the silence. The silence didn't answer. The mountains loomed like jagged teeth as the squad inserted under a moonless sky. The air was thin, cold, biting at exposed skin. Each breath felt stolen. They moved in silence, boots crunching on frost, eyes scanning every shadow. The night swallowed their shapes, the wind carrying the faint rattle of gear. The private kept glancing at her, nervous, as if expecting her to break formation again. The sergeant marched ahead, his posture iron, his rifle gripped like a lifeline. Hours passed, nothing but rock, ice, and the endless dark. Until a light flickered in the distance, small, faint, almost nothing. The squad froze. The sergeant raised his hand. Eyes on, could be a camp, could be a trap. They crept closer, every step deliberate. The light grew, a single lantern swaying outside a makeshift tent pitched against the cliff face. Through the scope she saw movement, not fighters, families, huddled, half-starved. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The sergeant's voice came over comms. "Possible insurgent hideout, call it in." Her stomach turned. These weren't insurgents, they were refugees. But if she spoke now, she'd confirm every suspicion, every doubt. So she stayed silent. They watched from the ridge for hours. Frost gathered in their hair, their lashes, their weapons. The families below tended a fire, children curled against mothers, men with hollow cheeks too weak to lift rifles if they even had them. The sergeant muttered, "They'll send someone for them. They always do. Better to take them out before that happens." The private whispered, "They're not armed." The sergeant shot him a glare. "Not yet, don't be naive." The private looked at her, eyes pleading. And still she said nothing. By dawn the call came through, "Eliminate." One word, cold, detached. The sergeant exhaled, long and tired. "You heard command." The squad shifted uneasily, rifles raised. She felt her breath catch, her chest lock. Her finger hovered near the trigger. The private's voice cracked in her ear, "Say something." Her lips parted, but no words came. Because if she spoke now, if she broke again, there would be no coming back. The sergeant's hand went up, "On my mark." But the mark never came. A shot rang out. Not hers, the private's. It tore into the dirt at the sergeant's feet, shocking everyone into stillness. His face twisted in fury. What the hell was that? The private's hands shook violently. "They're not fighters, they're not." "Stand down," the sergeant roared. But the private couldn't. His rifle wavered between his squad and the families below, tears streaking his dirty face. And then finally she spoke. "Lower your weapon." The words cut through the chaos like a blade, quiet, firm. The private's breath shuddered. Slowly his rifle dropped. The sergeant's glare turned to her. "This is on you, all of it." But she didn't flinch. She just stared past him, at the families huddled below, at the dawn light spilling across the peaks. And in that moment, she knew her silence had changed. It wasn't submission. It was defiance. They withdrew without firing another shot. Command would rage, yes. Reports would be rewritten, words twisted, truths buried. But the families lived. That was enough. Back at base, the colonel summoned her again. His office was darker this time, blinds drawn, the weight of the war pressing into the room. "You interfered." She stood tall. "No, I refused." His brow furrowed. "Do you think you're above orders?" Her throat tightened, but her voice didn't waver. "No, sir. I just don't believe silence should be mistaken for obedience." For a long moment he stared at her, unreadable. Then he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You're walking a line that doesn't end well." She met his gaze. "Maybe, but at least I'll know I didn't cross the wrong one." The colonel exhaled, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "You think this war has room for conscience?" Her hand tightened on her brother's tags. "No, sir, but I carry one anyway." That night, alone in the barracks, she lay awake listening to the hum of the base. Engines rumbling, voices echoing in distant halls. Life moving, mission after mission, without pause. She thought about the private, about his trembling hands, his desperate shot. And she realized her silence wasn't hers anymore. It was spreading, infecting, giving others the courage to question. It was dangerous, reckless, necessary. For the first time, she felt something close to hope. And that terrified her more than anything else. Why did the private aim his rifle at their own sergeant? That question poisoned the squad like rot. No one asked it out loud, but every glance carried it. Every silence held it. Back on base, eyes followed them through corridors. Conversations cut short when they walked into the mess. Something had broken in the canyon, something you couldn't stitch back together with silence or lies. She felt it in the way boots scuffed instead of marched, the way jokes died before reaching a punchline. The squad wasn't a unit anymore. It was fragments. And everyone looked at her, as though she were the crack that split them. The sergeant kept his distance now, not out of fear, out of fury. He spoke to her only in orders, his voice stripped of anything human. "Watch that perimeter. Load that gear. Check the scope." Cold, mechanical, precise. The private avoided both of them, drifting like a ghost, eyes hollow, shoulders sagging under guilt. He hadn't meant to fire that warning shot. It had ripped out of him like a confession, and now the weight of it pressed him into the ground. One night she found him outside, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. His rifle lay across his knees, his finger tracing the trigger guard like a man afraid of his own shadow. "They're watching me," he whispered. "They're watching all of us," she said. "No, me, they know it was me, I ruined it." His voice cracked. "I don't sleep, I see his face, the sergeant when the shot went off. I thought he'd kill me right there." She lowered herself beside him, the cold biting through her fatigues. "You didn't ruin anything." He looked at her, eyes raw. "Then why does it feel like I did?" She didn't answer because she felt the same. The colonel called her in again 2 days later. His office felt darker each time, the air heavier, as though every silence between them pulled more oxygen from the room. "You're spreading doubt," he said. Her jaw clenched. "I haven't said anything." "That's exactly the problem." His eyes pinned her like bayonets. "Your silence has become a weapon. Soldiers are asking questions they shouldn't. Orders are hesitated on. Do you know what hesitation does in war?" She did, she lived it. But she didn't break. The colonel leaned forward. "You think you're protecting them. You're not. You're putting every one of them in danger. One fracture in a squad gets people killed, and I can't allow that." She breathed slowly, carefully. "So what are you going to do?" He didn't answer, not with words. He simply slid another folder across the desk. Her stomach turned before she even touched it. The mission was written in blood before it began. A high-value target, they called it. Remote village. Intelligence said insurgents were holed up there, planning the next wave. "Level it," the colonel's orders read. "No survivors." The sergeant didn't question it. He just gathered the squad and relayed the briefing in that same clipped, mechanical voice. But his eyes, when they flickered toward her, burned like coals. He knew this would be the breaking point. The private's hands trembled during prep. He dropped a magazine, fumbled his vest straps. The others noticed, whispers curdling like smoke. By the time they loaded onto the transport, the squad was no longer a squad. It was a room full of ghosts waiting to see which one of them would fall first. The village came into view at dusk. Mud walls, smoke rising from cooking fires, children chasing each other between huts. Her chest tightened. They weren't insurgents, not all of them, maybe not any, just people. The sergeant lifted his rifle, signaling. The squad spread out, boots crunching through dry grass. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke. She froze in the shadows, her scope fixed on the faces moving through the village. Farmers, mothers, old men with bent spines. Her breath caught. "Target in sight," the sergeant's voice hissed over comms. Her finger hovered on the trigger. The private's whisper crackled in her ear. "They're just villagers." The sergeant barked, "On my mark." But she couldn't, not again. Her silence roared inside her, deafening. And then she moved. She stepped from cover, rifle lowered, voice cutting through the night. "Stand down." The squad froze. The sergeant's head whipped toward her, fury blazing. "What did you just say?" Her heart hammered, but her voice held. "Stand down." The private lowered his weapon instantly, relief flooding his face. Two others hesitated, eyes darting between the sergeant and her. The sergeant's face twisted. "This is treason." Her voice was quiet. "This is conscience." The silence between them stretched, sharp and brittle. And then the sergeant raised his rifle at her. The squad gasped. The barrel stared her down like a final judgment. For the first time in months, her breath caught not from fear, but from clarity. This was it. Not a mission, not orders, a choice. The private shouted, stepping between them, "Don't." The sergeant snarled, "Move or I'll put you down too." But the private didn't move. His hands shook, His body trembled, but he held his ground like a wall built of desperation. Behind him, villagers gathered, their faces pale with confusion, fear, hope. She lifted her chin, meeting the sergeant's eyes. "You can kill me. You can kill him, but you'll never silence this." Her hand pressed against her chest, where her brother's tags rested. "This isn't obedience. It's survival. It's humanity." The sergeant's finger tightened on the trigger. And for a moment, the world held its breath. A gunshot cracked. But it wasn't his. One of the squad fired, not at her, not at the private, at the ground, a warning. Another soldier lowered their rifle, then another. One by one, the barrels fell, the weight of their silence shifting. The sergeant stood alone, weapon still trained on her, rage searing his features. But he saw it. He'd lost them. Slowly, with a sound more dangerous than any bullet, he lowered his rifle. The village exhaled, the squad exhaled. And she, for the first time, felt the crushing silence lift. That night the squad camped on the edge of the village. The villagers offered them food, water, blankets, small kindnesses in a war built on cruelty. The private sat beside her by the fire, staring into the flames. "You saved them." Her throat tightened. "We saved them." He shook his head. "No, I just followed you. You started this." She didn't answer because he was wrong. She hadn't started it. Her brother had. In her silence, in her grief, in her refusal to let it end with him. But she knew one thing. Command wouldn't forgive this. The colonel's silence had always been a warning, and now it was a sentence. Her choices had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. And when the reckoning came, she wouldn't be able to hide behind silence anymore. The dawn broke pale over the village, the horizon bruised with gray and ember light. Smoke rose from cookfires, the smell of bread and wood mixing with the scent of damp earth. For a fleeting moment, it looked like peace. But she knew better. Peace in this war was just the silence between storms. They left the village at first light, boots crunching on dirt roads, villagers watching with eyes that said gratitude and fear in equal measure. Some waved. Some clutched children tighter. Some just stared as though memorizing the soldiers' faces before the storm swallowed them again. The sergeant marched in front, shoulders rigid, his silence heavier than any pack. His authority had cracked in the canyon and shattered in the village, and though he still wore the stripes, he no longer carried their weight. The squad followed like shadows. No chatter, no jokes, just footsteps and breaths. And her at the rear, carrying the weight of what they'd done. Or rather, what they hadn't done. Back at base, the colonel was waiting. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His office felt like a courtroom, his silence the gavel. "You disobeyed," he said at last, his words falling like stones. She stood at attention, the tags around her neck burning against her skin. "I refused an unlawful order." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Unlawful. The law of war is written by those who win it. You think conscience outweighs command." She held his gaze. "I think humanity does." The silence that followed stretched, taut and dangerous. Finally the colonel leaned back, his voice low. "You've infected your unit, tainted their obedience. That's not bravery, that's cancer." Her jaw tightened. "If that's true, then it's a cancer we needed." For a flicker, something dark shifted in his expression, not anger but calculation. "You've left me no choice." They came for her that night. Military police, faceless behind helmets, boots pounding against the barracks floor. Her squad barely stirred, frozen in their bunks, their breaths caught. The private sat up, panic written across his face. No, she saved them. A rifle butt silenced him, slamming him back into his bed. She didn't resist. They bound her wrists, hauled her through corridors, threw her into the back of a truck like cargo. Her silence was all she had left. The tribunal was swift, too swift. Charges: insubordination, treason, endangering a mission. Evidence: Her refusal, the sergeant's testimony, the colonel's words. The defense, none allowed. The verdict, guilty. Sentence, execution at dawn. In her cell, she sat on the concrete floor, back against the wall, the tags heavy in her palm. She ran her thumb over the letters of her brother's name until they blurred with tears. She remembered him in the river, laughing as the current dragged them both under, their mother shouting from the bank. She remembered him pulling her back to shore, always him first, always saving her. And now she understood. It wasn't silence she carried, it was him. Every refusal, every withheld word, every breath she didn't waste on lies. He lived in that silence. And tomorrow, when they took her life, maybe he'd still live in it. The night stretched thin. Boots clicked in the corridor, guards packing. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dog barked. Somewhere closer, a soldier cried quietly into his pillow. Then a whisper at her door. "Ma'am." The private's voice, urgent, trembling. Through the slot in the cell door, she saw his face, pale in the dim light. "I can get you out," he hissed. "There's a truck, away past the fence. You don't have to die for this." Her chest ached. For a moment she almost believed it. But she shook her head. "If I run, they'll hunt you all, every one of you." He gripped the bars, desperate. "Then let me take your place, please. You don't understand what you mean to us." She reached up, pressing her hand against his through the cold iron. "I understand too well." His eyes brimmed. "Then at least let me tell them. Let me tell the world what you did." Her throat tightened. "If you tell them, they'll silence you too." He didn't flinch. "Then let them. Some things are worth saying." For the first time in months, her lips curved, a ghost of a smile. "Then don't say it, show it, live it." The guard's footsteps thundered closer. The private slipped away, vanishing into the shadows. Her hand lingered on the bars, the echo of his touch fading. Dawn bled across the sky like an open wound. They marched her to the yard, boots sinking into frost. The firing post stood waiting, wood darkened by the memory of others. The squad was there, faces pale, eyes burning. The sergeant stood among them, rigid, unreadable. The colonel watched from a distance, arms crossed, his silence more final than any verdict. They bound her to the post, offered her a blindfold. She refused it. The tags around her neck gleamed in the morning light. The officer read her crimes aloud. Each word sounded hollow, meaningless against the weight of the moment. "Any last words?" he asked. She inhaled, felt the cold air burn her lungs. And she said nothing, because silence had always been her answer. The squad raised their rifles. Her eyes met the private's, his hands shook, his lips moved silently. "I'm sorry." She gave him the faintest nod, not forgiveness, not farewell, just recognition. The command rang out. The shots cracked. Her body jerked, then stilled. The tags clinked softly against her chest as she fell. And then the silence returned. But silence does not always mean absence. Whispers spread, first in the barracks, then in the mess, then beyond the wire. Soldiers spoke in hushed voices of the one who refused, the one who stood down the sergeant, the one who saved a village with nothing but defiance. The colonel tried to bury it, reports vanished, records burned, but silence has its own voice, louder than any order. The private carried it forward, not in words, in choices, in refusals, in humanity that bled into every mission after. Others followed, quietly at first, then louder, until silence became a movement. And though her name was never carved on monuments, though history never wrote her chapter, she lived in every soldier who remembered that war was not only about orders. It was about conscience. It was about silence. Her silence,